Welcome students to another episode of C-Sex Social Studies with me, Albert Inchinali. So far, we've been looking at the family. We've looked at types of families, we looked at types of unions, we've even looked at the functions of families. And last week, we looked at the traditional roles of men and women in families. Now, we will continue the conversation on families. And at the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe the traditional roles of men and women in the past. We'll do a little review. We will identify the causes of changing roles in society. And we are going to discuss the positive and negative effects of changing roles on Caribbean society. Now, before we go into our objectives for today, we must be able to define certain terms. Now, I'm sure you've heard the terms sex and gender being used when addressing family issues or when addressing the concept of family. Now, sometimes people use those two terms interchangeably. Sometimes they say sex when they mean gender, and sometimes they say gender when they mean sex. But to avoid any confusion for this session, we will define what sex is and what gender is. Sex refers to the biological aspects of an individual as determined by their physical characteristics. Sex is generally male or female, and it has to do with your physical makeup. It has to do with your reproductive organs. At birth, you may be assigned a sex, whether you're male or female, based on biology. Now, gender is a bit different from sex. Gender refers to the characteristics or the qualities of women, men, girls, and boys that are socially constructed. These include norms, behaviors, and roles associated with being a woman, being a man, being a girl, being a boy, as well as relationships with each other. In other words, sex is based on biology and gender is socially constructed. When we say somebody behaves like a boy or somebody behaves like a girl, why do we say that? Because we expect certain behaviors to be the norm for boys and certain behaviors to be the norm for girls. And these behaviors were assigned by society, right? So that's the difference between sex and gender. And because these are all behaviors and norms and values and attitudes and actions that are assigned to male and female, when we speak of gender, that's why we also use the term gender roles. All right? Now, before we go and look at the changing roles of men and women in society, let us review what are traditional roles of men and women in society. In the past, people believed that men's and women's roles should be determined by the facts that men were physically stronger and women were the ones who carried and breastfed children. The strong man should be the hunter and the gatherer. He's the one expected to go out and bring the food, be the breadwinner for his family. The woman, meanwhile, would stay at home, care for and nurture her children, and be there to do the same for her partner when he returned home. That is why some people say a woman's place is in the home. And that is traditionally speaking what has happened in the past. Now, you may have noticed that in Caribbean society, like much of the world, gender roles are changing. Yes, gender roles have changed considerably over the years, and roles are a lot less clearly defined. What was traditionally regarded as boys' work, girls do now. What was traditionally regarded as girls' work, boys do now. That's because the lines are blurred, and it's now much more acceptable for boys to do jobs or tasks that were assigned to girls, and for girls to do jobs and tasks that were assigned to boys. Physical strength is actually no longer a dividing factor as workplaces become more mechanized. When we talk about automation and we talk about technology, now you find that robots and machine and equipment are replacing a lot of hard labor that was traditionally done by men. So if the machines are replacing hard labor and you need someone to manage the equipment and to operate the equipment and the machinery, then you find that more women are given an opportunity to do so. In the past, like we said, men were also expected to be the chief breadwinner in the family, and in recent times, many women are earning the same as men or even more than men. And that's really incredible, and it really is a step forward as we talk about progress and rights for women. Now, despite these changing roles in society, unfortunately, there are still many gender stereotypes that exist. What do I mean by gender stereotypes? A gender stereotype is a generalized view or preconception about attitudes or characteristics that are or ought to be possessed by women and men, or the roles that are or should be performed by men and women. Many people in the Caribbean, many Guyanese, we still have a mentality that there are certain jobs that only men should do, and there are certain jobs that only women should do, or men should not do this, men should not like this, girls should not like that. And when we have those preconceived ideas and we have such a mentality, we can say it is a form of gender stereotype. It's a gender stereotype when we believe these ideas without thinking of how life has changed and how society has progressed. At this point in time, we will be looking at a short animation video, and I want you to pay attention to this video because I have a question for you. And that question is, what are some examples of gender stereotypes mentioned in the video? Look at the video carefully, and then I'll ask you the question again.
Created using Powtoon.
Alright students, did you enjoy that video? I sure hope you did. Can you think of some gender stereotypes that were mentioned in the video of the views, the traditional views we have as it relates to what men should do or how men should behave, as opposed to what girls should do or how girls should behave? Yes, based on that video, we saw that many people still think that only men have professional jobs or should be professionals. We saw a patient who went into a doctor's office. He saw a female and he asked, "Could I see the doctor?" And she is the doctor. So that was a surprise to him. And that's an example of gender stereotypes, whereby you think that certain jobs men or women cannot do. We also saw in the video that boys are the ones who traditionally had to be very macho, very athletic. And if you weren't athletic, if you weren't macho, then something is wrong with you, right? We saw how girls were discouraged from liking sports or taking part in sports. We saw how boys are not encouraged to show emotions. If they're sad, if they're angry, they always have to bottle up their emotions. And that really is an example of gender stereotypes. We only think that only women should be kind or nurturing. And all of this really are examples of gender stereotypes. So it's always good to think whether you have a thought that could be an example of gender stereotype. The next time you see a woman being an engineer or a web designer or being a soldier or doing well in math and science, do you feel like she doesn't have a place there, or you question her ability? If you do that, then it's a form of gender stereotyping. Now that we've looked at gender stereotyping and we've spoken about roles that are changing in society for both men and women, we must question why. Why do we experience such a change? And there are many different reasons for the changing roles of men and women in society. And one has to do with greater recognition of women's rights. For centuries, women have been fighting for equal rights. In the past, women were expected to have a particular status or certain roles in society. They were seen as inferior to men, and they had to be submissive to men. Since the early 20th century, women in the Caribbean, like women around the world, have been advocating for women's rights and equality. As a result, there has been a change in the status of women due to changing attitudes. So these attitudes that have changed did not happen overnight. Women were always fighting. They always had to advocate for their rights. You know, at one point in time, women could not vote. Women weren't allowed to vote. Women were paid less in same jobs that were held by men. And we still have that situation existing today in some circumstances, right? So women are still continuously fighting for equal rights. I would like to share a very popular quote by Hillary Clinton with you. And Hillary Clinton famously said, "Human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights. Human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights. Let us not forget that among those rights are the right to speak freely and the right to be heard." Those are the words of Hillary Clinton. Women's rights are human rights. If we're advocating for human rights, then we must advocate for women's rights as well. And if you know anything about Hillary Clinton, you would know that she once ran for president of the United States of America. She was actually the first ever woman to be nominated by a major political party in the US for presidency. And it's interesting. But I also want to let you know that the Caribbean has been far more progressive than the US in terms of having many female leaders and female leaders of governments. In Guyana, we had a female president, Janet Jagan. Trinidad and Tobago has had a female prime minister, Kamala Persad Besessar. Jamaica has had a female prime minister, and Barbados currently has a female prime minister, Mia Mottley. So the Caribbean has not been doing too badly on that front. If we are talking about women's rights and we're talking about changing roles of men and women in society, then we must talk about feminism. And that's a concept that is not always understood. And there may be many misconceptions about what feminism is. Now, in the simplest terms, feminism is a theory that women and men should be equal politically, economically, and socially. That's all that it means. It means that women and men should be equal politically. They should all be given the right to vote. They should all be allowed to be part of parliaments. They should all be allowed to be leaders of their countries. They should be given rights as it relates to the economy, as it relates to their livelihood. For example, women should be able to be paid the same amount of money as a man for the same job. And socially as well, they should not be considered as inferior to their male counterparts. So that is what feminism is all about. The theory that women and men should be equal. Now that we've defined what feminism is, let us talk about what feminism is not. There are many misconceptions about feminism, and one of those misconceptions is that feminists hate men. That's a misconception, that women who fight for equal rights, they have a strong dislike or an aversion to men, and that is not what feminism is. There's another misconception that feminists are unattractive and they're not feminine enough. They don't behave girly, or they do not subscribe to society's ideas of what makes a woman. You could be quite beautiful, quite attractive, and be a feminist. Now, there's also another misconception that we need to talk about, and that misconception is that feminists can only be women, or that only women are feminists. But anyone who really believes that women should be treated equally like men are essentially feminists, because you're not fighting for more rights, you're fighting for equal rights. And that is really what we need to understand as it relates to the topic or the concept of feminism. Feminism is not about women saying they want more rights than men, they want to be better than men, they want to be superior than men. No, they just want to have access to equal opportunities, to opportunities that men have as well. President Barack Obama once said, "I may be a little grayer than I was 8 years ago, but this is what a feminist looks like." And essentially what he's saying is that men can also be feminists, men can also advocate for equal rights as it relates to women. Prince Harry also once said, "When women are empowered, they immeasurably improve the lives of everyone around them, their families, their communities, and their countries." This is not just about women. We men need to recognize the part we play too. Real men treat women with dignity and give them the respect they deserve. And this is coming from Prince Harry. He's all about respecting women. That is why if you see your dad hitting your mom, you should let him know that it is wrong and he should treat her with respect. And many of you will in turn create your own families. And boys specifically, when you have your wives, treat them with dignity and respect. Another factor that is responsible for the changing roles of men and women in society has to do with increased educational opportunities for women. Gaining educational opportunities has been a struggle for both men and women in the Caribbean. Traditionally, the preference has been to invest in male education because men were expected to be leaders in society. So a family who may have limited resources may decide to educate the boy in the family instead of the girl, because they feel as though the girl, if you educate her, she's going to leave, she's going to get married, and then it wouldn't make sense to educate her. But now we see more women are given educational opportunities. More women are attending universities. More women are professionals. And this is because there are more educational opportunities for women. Additionally speaking, increased industrialization is a factor that is responsible for the changing roles of men and women in society. Physical strength is no longer seen as a prerequisite in the workplace. With increased mechanization, women often engage in jobs which were traditionally reserved for men. We see more women in factories, more women in the manufacturing sector, more women on the battlefield being soldiers. We see more women being engineers. We see more women climbing poles and fixing our electricity and doing all sorts of things because of industrialization. There's more equipment, there's more machinery, there's more automation that makes it easier for women to engage in these kinds of jobs. Now, because of globalization as well, and we're exposed to so many products from around the world, we have a variety of goods and services to choose from. And as a result of that, many of us are materialistic. We always want more. And if you have a mom and a dad and they want a lot of stuff, basically, it means that both persons have to be working to supply not only their wants, but their needs. So, therefore, we can say that a desire for material possessions has driven many families to concentrate on earning more to facilitate their lifestyles. The lifestyle that they want, one person cannot be the sole breadwinner. Therefore, more women are given opportunities to go out and work to contribute financially to the family's needs and wants. Now, changing roles in the Caribbean family is not only concentrated on mothers and fathers, but also grandparents as well. Now, grandparents are retiring at a later age, and even if they retire, they may still find other jobs to do, and they may also want to socialize with their friends, and they have their own recreational activities that they engage in. So as a result of that, grandparents are not always accessible or available to take care of children, to supervise them, and to help with the child rearing process. Some of them just are not simply interested in taking care of grandchildren. It's not like ages ago whereby you could always depend on grandparents to take care of children. No. So that is an example of how changing roles are happening in the Caribbean as well. It's also worth mentioning that many parents now may even reject the involvement of grandparents in their children's lives. And that's because they have a different idea, a different concept of how they want to raise their children. So they don't always need the input of their parents. Mothers and fathers don't always need the input of their parents because they feel like they can do a good job and they're prepared for it. Now, before I go, there is homework, yes. Just because you're not in school physically, that doesn't mean you don't have homework. So I have a question for you, and I hope you'll be able to answer it because we've said all of it, we've explained all of it, so no worries. My homework question for you is, the roles and responsibilities traditionally assigned to males and females are changing across the Caribbean. Explain the following. A, the traditional roles of men and women. B, the ways in which these roles are changing. C, what has brought about these changes. And D, the effect the changes are having on Caribbean society. As it relates to A, B, and C, we did those concepts, we explained, and we spoke about information as it relates to those ideas. As it relates to D, we haven't done that yet, but I believe you're capable of answering that question. So brainstorm and think about it clearly, spend some time, jot down your answers, and then formulate your paragraphs. Students, bear in mind that for CSEC Social Studies Paper 2, you are tasked with writing essays. And when you write an essay, you have to ensure that your ideas flow, they relate, and you're able to organize. So I want you to write in paragraph form. For each point, A, B, C, and D, write in a different paragraph because those ideas are related, and when you do so, you will essentially be creating an essay. Do take care. Until next time.